Our mission is to support a model of growth that allows America's cities, towns, and neighborhoods to become financially strong and resilient. We talk about cities, we talk about towns, we talk about counties and parishes and boroughs. We're really talking about our local units of government, the very base unit of government that we use to govern our day-to-day interactions. We could have named our organization Strong Local Units of Government. That would have been a really long web address, not quite as good on a business card. So if I talk about cities, if I talk about towns, understand what we're talking about here are local units of government. There's three primary takeaways from this presentation. And I'm going to begin with this and I'm going to end with this. The first, the current path that cities are on is not financially stable. The second, the future for most cities is not going to resemble the recent past. And then third, the main determinant of future prosperity for cities will be the ability of local leaders to transform their communities. I want to start by taking you back. And I want you to think about the way that we have built places for thousands and thousands of years. These are two artist renderings of ancient places. The one on the left is a city called in the Fertile Crescent. It's one of the oldest civilizations that has ever been excavated, about 6,000 BC. The one on the right, of course, is ancient Rome. If you think about the layout and the design of these cities, they were designed around the dominant transportation mode of the day, that of course being your 2 feet, right? People in these cities walked everywhere they went, and so the scale of the buildings, the separation between different types of uses, the way things were laid out, the way different buildings were situated, all of this had to do around the people who walked. And you can fast forward thousands and thousands of years up to, this is my hometown. I come from a little town called Brainerd, Minnesota, in central Minnesota. This is in the early 1900s. You fast forward all the way to this time and see that even though people arrived here by train often, when they arrived by train, they would get off and they would walk everywhere. And so the layout, the scale, the spacing, all those things are very, very similar as they have been for thousands and thousands of years. Beginning just before the Depression and then accelerating after World War II, we began to design places around a different transportation technology. Right? We began to build places around the automobile. We came up with different building types, different building styles, different ways of connecting things. We came up with ideas of zoning, the hierarchical road network, all these things that to us today seem very, very normal. If we were to go around and ask people to explain this, most Americans today would talk about this in terms of progress. We used to be people who walked, we built cities around people who walk. We're now people who drive, we build cities around people who drive. Someday we will have jet cars, and we will build cities around people with jet cars. And someday we will teleport, and we will build cities in a completely different way, right? This is a very affirming story that we tell ourselves. It's a story of progress. I want to paint this in a little bit different light to set up this conversation, one that isn't so affirming of where we're at today. When we look at these cities, these ancient places, what we're looking at this point here is the culmination of thousands of years of trial and error experimentation in how to build places. People would try things out. What worked, they would copy and build upon. What didn't work, they would throw away. And when I mean didn't work, I mean people died, right? Things went badly. People learned through trial and error the hard way over thousands and thousands of years before we even got to these points here. These cities were successful enough to actually endure over time. And by the time you get to the early 1900s, you have a pattern of development that had been time-tested over thousands and thousands of years in different cultures, in different latitudes, in different economic environments. It was very similar everywhere around the world. When we look at this style of development, well, it seems very normal to all of us. This is the world we live in. This is the world we grew up in. This is the world we know. It's important to understand that We didn't try this out somewhere to see if it would work. We didn't take it, try it in Arkansas for a couple hundred years and figure out all the quirks, right? We just did this everywhere, all at once, across this entire continent. It's important to understand that this is a huge experiment. A huge experiment socially, culturally, politically, and financially. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about some of the implications of that experiment that maybe weren't clear to us 2 generations ago when we started down this path. If we look today at the way we grow our cities, the way we build them, the way we invest in them, there's 3 primary mechanisms. The first is transfer payments between governments. This is the idea that the federal government, the state government, as our partner in creating growth, helps us to do things like build sewer systems and water systems, to expand public facilities, subsidize certain types of housing. The second mechanism of growth is transportation spending. This is the idea that we pool our gas tax dollars or whatever resources we have. We then spend those on widening highways, building interchanges, putting in transit systems, building frontage roads. These create jobs during the construction process, but also create a platform for growth over the long term, right? The third mechanism is debt. And while public debt is a very important part of this conversation, back in 1950, at the beginning of this experiment, the typical city spent around 2% of their budget on debt service. Today that's 16% and rising. So public sector debt is a big part of this, but even more important than that is private sector debt. The ability of individuals and businesses to get long-term financing, to have that financing sold off onto a secondary market, packaged with other similar products, securitized, sold off and bought up by pension funds around the world. This creates an enormous amount of liquidity, an enormous amount of capital in our markets that we can leverage to do things. These 3 mechanisms combine to allow us at the local level to create growth, and of course growth is good, right? Because it increases our tax revenue and allows us to do the things that as local governments we want to do. This is kind of city administration 101, right? If you think this through, there's some really powerful incentives at play. When we use these mechanisms of growth, generally the cost that we have as local taxpayers as part of the transaction is very nominal. When the federal government comes in with a grant, when the state government comes in with a program, when TDOT comes in with a big project, when the private sector comes in and makes a huge investment in a housing subdivision or a new development, the cost that we pay for that transaction as local taxpayers is usually pretty small. But the benefit that we get in terms of new tax base, new revenue, is quite substantial. The catch is that as part of this agreement, we take on the long-term liability of serving and maintaining all of these places. We agree that we will fix the roads, the streets, the sidewalks, the curbs, the pipes, the pumps, the valves. We'll provide fire protection, police protection, and every other service that's needed, regardless of how far flung these places are, because we are going to get that growth. If you think this through over the long term, in other words, if you look back at those pictures of ancient Rome and ancient Ur, and you say, we're building places to endure. We're building places that we expect to be around not only through our lifetime, but hundreds of years, maybe longer, right? We're building places to last. There's only one of 2 ways that this new experimental strategy makes any sense. Either growth is going to continue at ever-accelerating rates. In other words, we're always going to be able to generate that much more new growth, that much more new stuff that's happening that we can then take the revenue from and use to make good on all the promises we made a generation or 2 ago. Or the actual pattern that we're building in is going to create more wealth and prosperity for us as a community than it creates long-term in liabilities. Unfortunately, neither of these assumptions are true. I think we all intuitively understand why the first one is not. I'm going to share with you some examples now of why the second one is not. And this is where this presentation is going to get a little bit technical. I am an engineer. I kind of have an obligation to do that. I will walk you through it kindly and gently, okay? One of the things that we have done at Strong Towns is rejected the orthodoxy or the notion that we can go out and predict the future. In the planning profession of which I'm a part, in the engineering profession of which I'm a part, there's this notion that we can look at past data and use it to kind of predict what will happen in the future, right? And what we found is that regardless of how you approach that, it is really not a very sound science. What we have found a better approach is, let's look at what we have done. Measure that as deeply as we can so we understand what we've done. And then use our understanding to predict what will happen if we continue to do the same thing. This is a development, the kind of thing you'd find on the far edge of town. You've got some of these here in Memphis. This is a dead-end road with a cul-de-sac. These are 2.5 acre lots. The only infrastructure here is the road. When this was built in the mid-1990s, the road was gravel. The city insisted that the road be paved. When it was paved, the city paid half the cost, and the property owners paid the other half. We asked the question, all right, based on the taxes the city's recouping from the people that live in this development, the only people that really substantively use this road in any way, how long is it going to take the city to recoup what they just spent to build the road? $6,600 per property, half paid by the city. It's going to take the city 37 years just to break even. Now, the road's not going to last anywhere near 37 years. And when we get to the end and we have to rebuild it again, that's going to be completely on the public's dime, right? That's our obligation that we take on as part of this transaction. This is another development, this one a little bit more intense. These are half acre, 3/4 acre lots. These ones here on the west are a little bigger. They've got a limited amount of frontage. Again, if you look at this, we've got plenty of this kind of stuff here in Memphis. This is a loop, dead-end cul-de-sac. There's no through traffic, there's no commercial traffic. The only people that use this are really the people who live here. This was built in the early 1980s and completely fallen apart. The city went out and fixed it. The cost was $354,000. We asked the question, all right, based on the taxes the city's collecting from the people within this development, the only people who really substantively use this road in any way, how long will it take them to recoup what they just spent to fix it? The answer is 79 years. We then asked the question, all right, let's say that this city tried to recoup enough money from the people who lived here to actually pay to fix their road between now and the next time it fell apart. What would that mean? It would mean an immediate 46% increase in taxes across the board, with annual increases of 3% over inflation every year for the next 25 years, with all that money going just to maintain the road. Now sometimes people say, okay Chuck, we get it, or we know we lose money on residential, we make it up on commercial. Commercials are cash cow. To which my response is, I don't know any corporations that lose money on 90% of their holdings and try to make it up on the last 10%. I don't know why an incorporated municipality would think that was a good strategy. Nonetheless, we have this kind of cultural notion that if we can just create enough commercial property, we can make up for the fact that we lose money on this far-flung residential stuff. This is a business park. This is the kind of thing that we build, kind of in a build it and they will come sense. We build it, we try to attract new growth and development to it. This one was built in the mid-1990s. City is completely built out today. Every lot is occupied. The city felt this was such a successful project that they want to repeat it. They want to build the same exact thing in the same layout on property just right next door that they own. So we asked the question, all right, if we can build the same thing at the same cost and get the same return, would that be a good project for us? In today's dollars, it would cost $2.1 million to build. There's $6.6 million of investment that has taken place here as a result. Now, pause for a second. Of that investment that's taken place, 4 of those lots belong to a church. I go to church. Churches are a very important part of our community, but the church is not paying any taxes to the city. 2 2 of the lots belong to the school district. I went to public schools. My kids go to public schools. The school district is a very important part of the community, but the school district is not paying any taxes to the city for their bus maintenance facility. One of the lots belongs to the county. It's a maintenance garage. One of the lots is a city maintenance garage. Of the remaining lots, the ones that theoretically are private sector taxpayers, every single one was either sold for $1 and or the business was given a long-term tax subsidy in order to move into this park. For the sake of our analysis, we assume that every single lot would be built on within 12 months after completion of the project, that every single lot would be a non-subsidized full taxpayer, and that every single dime of revenue would go to retiring that debt. If that were the case, it would still take almost 3 decades, 29 years for the city to break even on this project. That's 29 years where everybody's taxes would need to go up in order to pay to mow the ditches and sweep the streets and provide police protection and fire protection and every other service that would be needed. And that's in the most wildly optimistic of scenarios. I used to go through, and for those of you that were here at the presentation I gave like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I was still doing this at that time. I would go through and I would give like a dozen examples. And it was almost like I was just beating it into people. And I would see like their ears start to bleed and people start to cry. And I realized that it was too much, right? So I can make the point I found with 3 examples. If you are someone who wants more examples, more case studies, more data, our website has all that on there. And I welcome you to go there. But for the rest of you, I'm going to get to the punchline. And again, I apologize for being an engineer. I like graphs. There's going to be 4 graphs here. That's it. I will walk you through them so they won't be painful, right? I know a lot of people are not chart and graph people. That's cool. We'll do this together. Let's say that a developer comes into our community and says, I have this piece of property out here that I would like to build on. I'm willing to follow all of your rules, all of your regulations. I'll build everything myself. I'll build all the houses. I'll build all the commercial properties. I'll put in the roads and the streets and the sidewalks and the curbs and the pipes and the pumps and the valves and the meters and everything that's needed. I'm not asking for any subsidies. I'm not asking for any waivers from your rules. The only thing that I'm asking is that when I'm done building all this stuff, I be able to donate it or turn it over to the public to maintain over the long term. What would we say? We would say, fantastic, right? You're going to meet all of our rules. You're building everything the way we've asked you to do. This isn't costing us a dime. We get all this new growth, all this new tax base. This is the most glorious transaction ever, right? Let's say though that we've heard of this strong town stuff. We're going to be prudent people here in Memphis. So when that revenue comes in from that new development, what we're going to do is we're going to take the portion that would normally go to maintain stuff, and we're going to set that aside. And every year when the revenue from that development comes in, we'll set it aside and we'll allow it to grow and accumulate. And then when we get out a generation and we have to actually make good on that promise we make that we will maintain and take care of this stuff forever, we'll use that money to do it. This is what that looks like. In year 1, everything is brand new. The money starts coming in. We take that portion that would go to maintenance, we set it aside. Then year 2, more money comes in, we add to what we had in year 1. In year 3, more money comes in, we add. Year 4, year 5. You see, as we go, we're just accumulating money, right? A 5-year-old street isn't costing us anything. A 10-year-old pipe is not costing us anything, right? And so as time goes on, we start to build up quite a bit of money. In fact, when we get 20 years out, we got a big pile of change there, right? The problem is, when we actually have to go and make good on that promise, when we have to actually go out and fix the things that we've been obligated to fix, what we find is that the cumulative amount of wealth that we've brought in as a city is insufficient. And from a cash flow standpoint, at the end of the day, we run far into the negative. Now, cities are not one development, right? Cities are a collection of developments, a collection of neighborhoods. Let's say that our developer comes in a couple years after that first development and says, that worked out really well for me, that worked out really well for you. I would like to do a similar project. And in fact, every other year from that point forward, developer walks in the door and says, I would like to do a similar project. In other words, this is the ideal scenario for any city. Nice, steady, continuous growth. And when the money comes in, we take that portion, we set it aside, we allow it to grow so that we can make good on the promises that we make when we agree with that transaction to take over the long-term maintenance and liability. This is what that looks like. In the first year, we've got our first development paying in. We set that money aside. We allow it to start growing. In year 3, we have another development paying in. In year 5, we have another. In year 7, 9, 11, and so on. And you can see, not only is each development adding to our overall cash, but we're having growth upon growth upon growth. And so our revenue actually starts to kind of accelerate upwards. We're having all this growth. And when we get to year 25, the year we have to make good on that very first promise we made way back in year 1, yeah, we've got to spend a little bit of money, but it's not a big deal, right? We've got it. We've had all this growth. The growth creates what we call the illusion of wealth. Because as we all intuitively understand, if you lose money on every transaction, you don't make it up in volume. If you ultimately lose money on every project you do, the further you go out into the time horizon, the more downward pressure there is on your budget. This is why we can look around at cities like Memphis, who have done everything right, done everything by the book, done everything that they were supposed to do, yet are going broke, right? We can look at cities across this country that have been following this playbook that was laid out for them post-World War II. My state in Minnesota, our League of Minnesota Cities, the organization that represents all the cities in the state at the Capitol, came out with a report that said by 2016, every single city in Minnesota will be bankrupt. Now, they meant, hard defaults like Detroit, but also soft defaults where you no longer maintain streets, no longer maintain pipes, lay off firefighters, lay off police. How is it that we have a system where every single city can go broke, right? This illusion of wealth is a really, really powerful thing. Now, you can look at this and say, okay, Chuck, we started this conversation by saying this is a really young experiment. We just, have been doing this 60 plus years. But I'm looking at what you're laying out here, and we should have gotten broke a long time ago. How did we get to this point? And this is my last graph. Those of you that are not graph people, this is it. This is a graph of debt. Everybody in this room is familiar to one degree or another with the conversation we're having nationally about our debt, right? The national debt is enormous, $20 trillion. I've had 7 quarters of calculus. I'm not going to stand up here and pretend that I understand what $1 trillion is, let alone 20 trillion, right? This is enormous, enormous sum of money. In this graph right here, the bottom line, the blue one, this is the growth of our national debt. That's that enormous sum, right? The black one is the GDP. This green line, the one that soars up like that, that's our private sector. That's debt that you and I share. That's home mortgages, commercial real estate loans, auto loans, credit cards, margin interest accounts, student loans. It's private sector debt. The way we financed the first life cycle, the first generation of this new experimental way to build was by using our savings and by reinvesting that illusion of wealth back into creating more growth. When that became insufficient to keep everything going, when we started to have drag, right, at the local level, what happened? It took us a while to figure this out. But we eventually shifted from an economy based on growth through savings and investment to an economy based on growth through debt accumulation. And growth through debt accumulation became such an important part of our economy that as we entered the third generation of this experiment, we actually allowed it to become predatory. We actually allowed systems and mechanisms to arise that encouraged people who couldn't afford homes to buy homes, who could afford modest homes to buy large homes, who could afford large homes to buy multiple extravagantly large homes. We encourage people to cash out their equity, right? We encourage people, we said, you don't have to have a down payment. You don't have to show you can make a payment. You don't even have to show you have a job, right? We needed the growth so bad that we allowed our system to prey on our neighbors. We cannot continue this experiment by having the private sector take on ever-accelerating levels of debt. Obviously, there's some huge implications here. The mechanisms of growth we become accustomed to are on the wane. The federal government is vastly overcommitted. The state government is vastly overcommitted. The idea that the federal and state governments are going to be able to come in and bail out every local city that goes broke is just not realistic. The DOT is vastly overcommitted. If you look at the projected revenues that they have versus the projected expenses, they're not even close. We have built more lane miles than we are capable of maintaining with the tax base and economy that we have. The idea that the DOTs would be able to come in and make transformative investments in our communities to create jobs and growth is just not a realistic proposition. The private sector is tapped out. The private sector does not have the capacity to continue to take on accelerating levels of debt. This means that the local governments are going to be forced to absorb the cost of our development habit. If we want that road fixed, we're going to have to pay for it. If we want that pipe repaired, that's going to come from us. If we want that new stadium, that new performing arts center, if we want that, whatever it is, fix our wastewater treatment plant, put in a water tower, basic stuff, right? That's going to come from us. We're going to have to find a way to do that. This can't be done in the current pattern of development without some incredibly large tax increases and or some devastatingly large cuts in services. Now, I didn't come here to tell you what you already know, right? Anybody here who has interacted to any degree with local governments understand that this is the debate we're having everywhere, right? How big is the tax increase going to be? Who's going to pay for it? How deep is the service cut going to be? And where is that going to be felt? It is critical at the local level that we see the third variable in that sentence, the current pattern of development. So long as we continue to build in a way that is functionally insolvent, there is no way that our cities are going to avoid becoming insolvent. So long as we continue to develop our places in a way that gives us an illusion of wealth today in exchange for long-term liabilities, there is no way that our cities are going to avoid going bankrupt. Whether that is a hard bankruptcy, like you see in places like Detroit and Stockton and San Bernardino, or whether it's the soft default, like you see in cities all over this country, including Memphis, where we decide we can't fix that street, we can't fill that pothole, we can't help that neighborhood, we can't keep those police and firefighters employed. We literally have to have a conversation about how we build places that are financially more productive and successful. So what's the solution? Anybody got an idea? I had to put this slide in because early on, as I was going around talking to people about this message, we would get all the way to the end. And we're going to talk for like the next 4 hours about things we can do. I'm glad somebody smiled at that. We're going to do 4 hours. talk for a while now about things we can do. I would get to the end, and someone would stand up and say, Chuck, you've made me really angry. Because you came here, told us the sky is falling, told us everything's bad, and you didn't tell us what the solution was. What is the solution to this problem? And it was frustrating to me, because I wasn't understanding the question. I was hearing them ask, what is the solution? And what they were really asking was something fundamentally different. What they were really asking was this. What can someone else change about what they're doing so that I don't have to change anything about what I'm doing? Okay? I don't know of any such solution. We have created for ourselves with this experiment a very complex set of problems. A complex set of problems that defy a solution or even a series of solutions. What we talk about at Strong Towns is how do we as intelligent thinking people in a community, talking to each other, working together, respond rationally to this complex set of problems. When we start talking about rational responses, I always start with this picture here. This again is my hometown, back in the early 1900s. And I love this photo. I love this photo. Because the planner in me, the kind of, technical geek part of me, is just in awe of what these people built. I look at the way the buildings line up perfectly, the way they frame the public realm at just those perfect classical ratios, right? There's great segmentation of the public space. The buildings themselves have wonderful symmetry. They front the public realm in just perfect ways, right? We would kill to have a street like this today. This is brilliantly designed. Let me ask you some questions about this place here. How thick was their zoning code? How many boards and committees did you have to go to get an approval to build something in this town? How many engineers, planners, urban designers did they employ? How many federal grants did they get? How many state grants did they get? How many grant writers do they have on staff, right? How much tax subsidy did they give out? How many businesses did they pay to move to this town? We can go through the list of things that we have convinced ourselves are absolutely essential to building a healthy, strong, productive place. They had none of them, none. Yet look at what they built. These were a bunch of illiterate lumberjacks in the middle of nowhere. This place is 2.5 hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul today. This was the middle of nowhere. Look what they built. How did they know how to do this? It's really simple. They just built what they knew worked. They looked around at the materials they had on hand, and they said, how do we take this knowledge that has been accumulated over thousands and thousands of years and build that? They just copied what they knew worked. After 60 years of this new experiment, after 60 years of engineers and planners telling people how to build great cities, after 60 years of all the incentives and the subsidies and the regulations and everything we've done to create growth, this street today looks like this. It's the exact same street from the exact same spot. It's a wasteland of parking lots and vacant buildings. And if you want to understand in one photo why our local governments are going broke, there it is. There's $500 million of public investment in that street right there. What's our return on that investment? What do we get back as taxpayers for having that long-term liability on our balance sheet? I showed this to a college class in Idaho, and a student stood up when I showed this, raised his hand, stood up, and said, Chuck, I'm from Costa Rica. Costa Rica is a very poor country. We can't afford to build the way you do here. When we build, we have to build one block at a time. And before we build the next block, we have to fill in every space on the block we just built. We're a very poor country. We can't afford to build this. We're a very poor country now too. We can't afford to build this way either. And for a while, that illusion of wealth made us feel like this didn't matter. That we could walk away from whole neighborhoods. That we could walk away from whole streets. That we could put in blocks and blocks and blocks of stuff. And it didn't matter what happened next. The illusion of wealth confused us and made us think that this didn't matter. This matters. And our challenge in our generation, and the challenge of leaders today, is to take this and make it into something again. Let's talk about how we do that. This is the tip of the spear. It's the first thing we need to change. And I tell you what, if there's one thing that I'm enthused about Memphis right now, your mayor got up today and said, this is changing. We're done with this. Build it and they will come. It's a brilliant movie plot, right? You got cornfields, baseball, you got a little bit of everything, right? It's a horrible economic development strategy. For some reason, not for some reason, I know why, we are today in what we call the desperation phase of this suburban experiment, this post-World War II experiment. We have now reached the point where cities are the dumb money at the card table. We are expected to step up and create growth, induce growth, be the money there that fills every gap. When the business can't quite make it, we're supposed to step in and make that happen. When the business comes to town, we're supposed to have everything shovel ready so that they can just walk in. That's the price of being a city today. That's the price of being in the game. Let me tell you, that is not how cities build wealth. That's not how cities grow rich. Let me show you how cities build wealth. Do you guys recognize this street here? Anybody? This is my hometown. Back in 1870. 30 years later, this street would become this. Exact same spot, right? Take a look at that. That street could be any city, right? Every city that was ever built prior to World War II, prior to this new experiment, every city that was ever built began just like that. Memphis began just like that. Chicago, New York, San Francisco, Houston, Vancouver, London, Paris, Rome, Dubai, Shanghai, they all started just like that, right? We built thousands of these across this country. And for a variety of reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even understand after the fact. It was the wrong people in the wrong place at the wrong time. All those complex variables didn't come together. A lot of these places failed. They never got past this. What happens when a place like this fails? Does the stock market drop by 25%? Does unemployment skyrocket to double digits? Do we have to have a bailout of $1 trillion to Wall Street banks? No, right? These were small investments. A few people lost a little bit of money, they would salvage what they could, and they'd move on to the next city. For a variety of reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even understand after the fact. It was the right place at the right time with the right people. All those complex variables that make a city came together. A lot of these places were successful. And when they were successful, something magical would happen. They would start to grow. They would start to grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and incrementally more intense. So after 30 years of incremental growth, this little street of pop-up shacks would turn into this. And as the city continued to grow, incrementally up, incrementally out, and incrementally more intense, these 2- and 3-story wood structures would be torn down and would become granite, rock, brick facade buildings. It's the same street. We don't create wealth by going to the casino and putting it all on red. The way we build wealth is by making small investments over a broad area over a long period of time. Let me show you how productive financially this style of development is. These are two identical blocks. The one on the left we've labeled old and blighted. The one on the right we've labeled shiny and new. If you look at them, you'll see that they are about the exact same thoroughfare, the exact same neighborhood. They've got the same amount of public infrastructure. They're the same area. Everything about them is the same, except for the style of development on them. The old and blighted block looks like this. Do you remember that 1870s pop-up block, those little shacks? This is the 1920s version of that. In 1920, as my city was continuing to grow up incrementally and intensity incrementally, it was also growing out incrementally. And these three blocks were the next increment of growth. This was the cheapest pop-up building that you could build in the 1920s. And had things continued, it would have grown incrementally up and incrementally more intense. But that didn't happen, right? Because what happened? You had the Depression, you had World War II, and then we had a completely different style of development that just leapfrogged right over this and started building in a different way. This block has stagnated for 90 years. The block two over used to look just like this. And the city labeled it blight, and the city had it torn down, and now we have the new drive-through taco joint. Everybody was thrilled about this, right? Not only did we get rid of blight, but it met everybody's concerns. The planner was happy because now the floor area ratio was met, the sign ordinance was met, there's plenty of parking. The engineer was happy because we got the cars off the street, so now the cars can drive through without being hindered, right? All the accesses are on the side streets. The environmental people that showed up were happy. They got native plants in the stormwater areas on the lot. And even the bike people were happy because they got them to install a sidewalk through here. The sidewalk ends right there, but it runs. There's hope, right? Here's what nobody bothered to look at. That old and blighted block has a total value of $1.1 million. That shiny and new block, same area, the same amount of public infrastructure, the same everything, just a different experimental style of building, has a total value of only $800,000. The city is actually getting 41% more tax revenue off of that old and blighted block. Understand what you're looking at. You're looking at the traditional style of development, the way that we built around this world in different cultures, different latitudes, different continents. We built everywhere in this way for thousands and thousands of years. You are looking at that in its most infant, basic form after 90 years of neglect. And it still outperforms by a wide margin this on its wedding day, right? I mean, it's never going to look that good, right? We all know the trajectory of the taco joint. 20 years from now, there'll be a new taco joint a couple miles up the road. This one will be turned into a used car lot. 5 years later, we'll be boarded up. They'll be selling drugs out the back. And the city will be looking for a grant to have it torn down and get something else built, right? We've all been there. We've all seen this happen. Let me ask you a question. Say we walk out of here tonight, and all of you fully grasp and understand that the problem we face in this country is not a lack of growth. We have had 6 decades of the most robust growth any society has ever had. What we lack is productive growth, growth that makes us wealthier over time. And so we dedicate ourselves to improving the value of all of our properties, making them more productive. And let's say that we set a goal that over the next decade, we're going to make both of these blocks double in value. We don't have a lot of money to spend. We can't throw money at this problem. We can only do little things. Let me ask you this. What kind of little things would you do to double the value of this block, make it more valuable over the next 10 years? Anybody have any ideas?
Facade.
We could fix up the facades, maybe paint them, to make them look a little bit better. I think that's a great start. Please?
Go vertical.
We could go vertical. Actually, to put a second-story residential on is illegal today, so we could change the ordinance to make that legal and allow people to put on a second story. I think that's a great idea. Anybody else?
Find local vendors.
We could invite some local vendors, try to get some action going on there. A couple of those buildings are vacant, so I think that would be a really good start. Anybody else?
Public realm, streetscape enhancements.
You know what, there's no trees here, we can actually sweep the sidewalk, we can put on a bench, some planters, there's a lot that we could do. Incentives you mentioned, I mean, I certainly think that that could be part of the conversation. We could reconnect the neighborhood, all those sidewalks have been ripped out. You know, we could slow the traffic down a little bit. We could go out on the street, pick 25 people out at random, put them in a room and say, we're gonna give you an hour, come up with 50 ideas to make this a better place. And we would get 50 ideas, right? We all intuitively know what needs to be done here. What would you do to double the value of this over the next decade? Any ideas? You don't have to. You don't own the property. You can't force them to do anything. You can't throw money at it because we're broke. We don't have the money. What would you do? I'll tell you what. I have no idea. I have no idea. This style of development has tremendous financial upside and very limited financial downside, while our new experimental approach has very limited financial upside, but a downside that can literally go negative when the building goes bad. We see the same kind of thing on the edge of the community. This is our Mills Fleet Farm complex. This is, I have to do this right. You guys don't know what Mills is, right? Mills is a Midwestern big box store. Their home is in my hometown. We're the headquarters, Marohn. If you go into your average Mills Fleet Farm, you're going to run into auto parts, animal feed, lumber, guns and ammo, camouflage lingerie. That's the product mix that you find in Mills Fleet Farm. Wildly successful throughout the Midwest, okay? Ours was a regular sized big box. It was so successful they doubled the size of it. This is an auto dealership and a gas station. This is a 19-acre piece of property. It's the most valuable piece of property in the whole area. When the Mills people show up at a council meeting, we just stop the council meeting and ask them, you know, what can we do for you, right? This is 19 acres of Brainerd's downtown. And I understand that there's a new TV series out about Fargo. If you've seen the movie Fargo, you've seen a not so flattering but not so inaccurate portrayal of downtown Brainerd. Not a great place. A lot of the second, third stories are unoccupied. A lot of the first stories are unoccupied. Most of our investment has been waiting for buildings to burn down, and then we clean up the mess and put in a parking lot. Not a great place, right? Not a place you take people to when they come and visit. 19 acres, just a different building style. That 19 acres out on the edge of town has a total value of $0.6 million per acre. It's a huge sum of money. These guys pay a ton of taxes. That 19 acres downtown, same amount of area, a different style of building, has a total value of $1.1 million per acre. The city is getting 78% more taxes on their old, rundown, decrepit downtown than they're getting on the best of the best of the best out on the edge. Let me ask you a couple questions here. How much did my city invest to get this? The DOT spent over $100 million building the bypass. The city spent $36 million just to get the sewer out to this point. Another tens of millions to get the water out here. Build water towers, expand the treatment facility. When I was an engineer, I actually built this road here. That was $2.4 million. The county built this road, multiple millions. The DOT went in and redid this intersection a year and a half ago. That was $500,000 just to redo that intersection. How much did my generation spend to get this? That was wealth that my great-grandparents and their contemporaries built slowly and incrementally over time and bequeathed to us. And we have slowly melted it down. That's the wealth of our community. What happens when Mills goes out of business? Which it will someday, right? We've all seen this. What happens when Mills goes out of business? What happens to this building? What happens to this auto dealership and this gas station, right? Nothing good, right? We all know that. There's 134 different properties in the downtown of Frankfurt. What happens when one of those goes out of business? What happens when one of those loses a tenant? What happens when we figure out that, you know what, we don't exactly have the right commercial residential mix, we need a little bit more residential, we need a little bit more commercial. You have a building style here that is very inflexible, very fragile, and not very productive. You have a building style here that is very flexible, very adaptable, and financially enormously productive. This is something we call a strode. A strode is a street road hybrid. It's the futon of transportation. If you think of a futon as being an uncomfortable couch that makes into an uncomfortable bed, a strode is a piece of transportation infrastructure that tries to do two things at once and does neither of them well. It tries to be both street and road. What is a road? A road is a high-speed connection between two places. If you think of a modern road today as being a replacement of the railroad is a road on rails, right? You got on at one spot, you got off on another, there's a high-speed connection between the two. We didn't have frontage railroads, we didn't have drive-through railroads. You got on, you got off, a high-speed connection. And if you look at this, we have put all the investments here to make this a high-speed connection. We put in 4 lanes. The lanes are highway scale. We put in a turn lane so that the turning traffic gets out of the way and the through traffic can go through as quickly as possible. But let me ask you this. Despite spending enormous sums of money to build these wide highway scale lanes, does anyone get to drive through here at high speeds? No, right? Because we have the speed limit set low, you've got traffic signals that make you stop. And so we put this enormous investment in, but we're not getting the return of a road. What is a street? A street is, and always has been, a platform for creating wealth and value in a community. And if you look at this, we've made investments to try to make this place more successful. We put in wide sidewalks, we put in decorative lights, we've bumped them out a little bit, we've put up planters and banners and benches and all that stuff. But is this capturing a lot of wealth? Is this creating a lot of value for our community? No. Why? Because if you're going shopping at this place here, and you want to go over to this place here, what are you going to do? You're not going to walk across 7 lanes, right? You're not going to walk down here, wait for the light, then go across and walk back up. What are you going to do? You're going to get in your car, you're going to whip a U-turn, you're going to turn around and get out, right? And all the businesses understand that, so they act rationally. And they put in parking lots, and they put in drive-throughs, and you get a return on your investment that is much more like that taco joint than that old and blighted block. Stroads are the bane of our communities. And if you want the low-hanging fruit for where to focus your efforts, we can take our stroads and make them into either great roads that move people at high speed between productive places, or great streets that build wealth and capture value for our communities. That's like the easiest thing we can do to start to make them more successful. How do we convert our stroads into streets? I want to walk you through this because we understand, again, how to do this. We just have to have the confidence to be able to do it. When engineers design a piece of transportation infrastructure, there's 4 values that they apply. The first thing they do is say, what is the design speed of this section that I've designed? They then say, what is the amount of traffic that I'm expected to handle? How do I build the safest corridor possible? And at what cost? These are the engineer's values. And these are the values of roads. Okay? What are the values of streets? I would say the values of streets are our values. And if you think about what you want in a place, what you want in the local streets, the streets out in front of your house, the streets out in front of your business, the streets where you walk and interact with people and meet and socialize and go out. Of those 4 values, which one is the most important one to you on the streets in your community? Is it speed, volume, safety, or cost? Which one's most important to you?
Safety.
Okay? Of the remaining 3, is it important to you on our local streets that cars be able to move quickly, that we be able to move a high volume of cars, but that we design something that is cost effective? Speed, volume, or cost? Is it more important to you that cars be able to drive quickly, or that we be able to handle a high volume of traffic? Speed or volume? You see what we're doing here? We know the values that need to be asserted if we're going to build productive, successful places. They're not a mystery. They're not beyond our comprehension and understanding. There are values. And we can't be afraid to assert those values. We start demanding that our streets be safe above all else, safe for everyone. We demand that they be cost effectively built. If we do those things, we start to bring this city back. We start to generate real wealth, real prosperity, real success. We can't be afraid to stand up and do what we know is right. There's one last thing I want to share with you. This is an adage that comes from Silicon Valley. It goes like this. Innovation that happens from the top down tends to be orderly but dumb, while innovation that happens from the bottom up tends to be chaotic but smart. This is the old server versus PC debate, right? And anybody that's got a smartphone knows how that ended, right? Let me show you what this looks like from a government standpoint. And I have to tell you, I go around this country talking to communities all the time, and I give them this example. Orderly but dumb. The city of Memphis has done everything right, according to the post-World War II script. Right? I'm here to tell you, you did everything right. You did everything the way you were supposed to. You ran the highways through the middle of the city. You ripped down buildings to do it. You ripped down buildings to build parking. You identified neighborhoods that you thought were blighted and undesirable. You moved people out. You built stuff you thought were better. You built the Beltway. You extended sewer and water out further and further. You ultimately built the second Beltway. You paid businesses to move to Memphis. You paid businesses to stay in Memphis. And at one point you said, you know what would make us successful? We had an NBA team in a pyramid-shaped stadium. I just imagine a big public meeting, right? Where people would walk up and say, here's my values and priorities. And someone said NBA team, right? And everybody had their stickers and they were putting stuff on the wall, and everybody put one on the NBA team because wouldn't that be cool, right? And then what is now the highest priority in the community? Not all the little needs that everybody has, but an NBA team. And I'm not slamming your NBA team. You guys kicked our butts. We're not in the playoffs. You are. You got a coach from Minnesota. I have to cheer for you. But really, we're talking about investments in the community. I think it would be really hard to say that your pyramid-shaped stadium has been, a catalyst for growth and success and prosperity, right? $35 million to get a Bass Pro Shop in there is not weak. This is orderly but dumb. Let me show you what chaotic but smart looks like. I don't know how many of you don't know the project that happened on Broad Avenue. Everybody in this room knows about this project. I love it. I'm not even going to tell you about this. You guys should be telling me about it. I go around the country and I give them this project and I show them, look what people can do. Look what people can do when they care. Look what people can do with a little bit of paint, a little bit of grit, a little bit of elbow grease, when they love a place, when they try to bring it back. Look what happens. You get new jobs, you get new growth, you get light reclaimed, you get new businesses. the return on this investment, this is what I'm in awe of, right? How much did we collectively as taxpayers spend on this? Nothing, right? Hardly any, a little bit of staff time, hardly anything. Yet, look at the new tax base. Look at the new growth. Look at the new jobs. This is chaotic but smart. Now, I can tell you what my city would do if we went up and did a project like your Broad Avenue, right? I can tell you what my city would do. Monday morning, they would be out with the power washers, getting rid of this. The city engineer would say, this is not in the manual for crosswalks. That line's not straight. We've got some potential liability. There's people here in Memphis that think that way too, right? There's people in Memphis that think that way too. How do we treat chaotic but smart? Because I tell you what, if we're going to be about quashing chaotic but smart, we're not going to get chaotic, and we're not going to get smart. And Memphis today needs smart. We need our people in all of our neighborhoods out there doing stuff like this, out there identifying the high return investments, the most needed projects. We have for decades been trying desperately to get that dollar out on the edge and growing, chasing that buck. And what we've left behind are the nickels and dimes in all of our neighborhoods that are just laying there waiting for us to pick up. And I'll tell you, the only people that can identify them are the people that are out there, that live there, that are part of those neighborhoods. If we don't embrace chaotic, we will not get smart. This is George. Our organization, Strong Towns, began in 2008 as a blog. And we still write a blog every day of the week now. When I first started writing, this guy named George would comment on all my stuff. I would put up a post at 7, at 7:10, there'd be some note from George. Chuck, I don't get this. Chuck, this doesn't make sense. Chuck, you said this last week and now you say this. Those two things don't mix. Explain yourself. And George was kind of a pain in my butt, right? He ultimately got my email address, started sending me stuff, and he friended me on Facebook. At this point, I'm still trying to work as a planner, and all day I'm getting, all these pop-up messages from George. After about a year and a half, George and I started to see eye to eye a little bit. And he asked me to come out and do a curbside chat in his community. Could you come out and talk to my place? And he arranged it. He set up the place, set up everything. I showed up. We had a really nice talk. No city council members came. They were all invited. The mayor didn't come. They were invited. But who showed up? A bunch of his neighbors, a bunch of his friends, about 20 people. We had a really nice conversation. When I left, George and I went out to dinner. And I remember sitting there, and this was in the very early days of me starting a nonprofit and getting into this. And I remember being very depressed. George is a nice guy, but George isn't an influential person. He's not on the city council. He's not on the planning commission. He doesn't own any property. He doesn't have any money. He's not connected to anybody. And I remember just thinking, I like this guy a lot. I like his energy. I like his enthusiasm. I like that he cares. But is this what running a nonprofit's all about? I have to go meet with people who are not going to ever make a difference? Is this what now my life has become? And I remember leaving feeling really, really depressed. A couple months later, I got an email from George. It had a link to a video. And I clicked on it. And here is a video of George at his city council meeting giving them the curbside chat. He had taken my slide presentation and inserted pictures and examples from his own city. So it was my stuff, then his, then mine, then his. And I watched this, and I watched the passion, and I watched the love that he had for his community, and I realized he was doing what I could never do, right? He was giving the talk for his community that I could never give. George started a neighborhood group. They started because their kids would walk to school. The walk was kind of a nasty walk, unsafe. They started out by taking turns walking their kids to school. they figured out that they could make the walk a little bit better by putting in some crosswalks, planting some shrubs, doing some little things to make the walk better. They started meeting on Saturdays in the coffee shop, talking about things they could do, projects they could undertake. They started a blog. They started sending stuff to the newspaper to run. When Walgreens came to town and was going to tear down a historic building and build a big parking lot with their store pushed way back, they showed up at the planning commission en masse, got the building completely turned around and rearranged, and framed the corner and kept the historic building as part of it. We stood back and looked at this in awe and said, you know what? We were wrong. I was wrong. We don't need better engineers, better planners, better public officials. We need more Georges. We need more people out there who love their communities, who care, who want to step up and take ownership, who are willing to do the little things that make a huge difference. We need more Georges. We actually started, kind of inspired by George, a neighborhood group in my community. One of the neighborhoods that were distressed, that had long been overlooked, that everybody had written off. And we started working this neighborhood. We started out doing kind of the standard things where we bring people in and try to chat with them. And we found that nobody was showing up, nobody was interested. So what did we do? We started having block parties. We started having bike rides. We did scavenger hunts. We started going out and just meeting people, just talking to them, observing how they interacted with the city. We saw the mom with the stroller walking through the ditch of weeds. We said, what are you doing? Well, I can't walk on the street. It's dangerous. I'm trying to get to the grocery store. I don't have a car. We saw the elderly woman with the walker trying to get over the mound of snow because the sidewalks hadn't been cleared yet. And she had to get to the pharmacy. We started to see these things. We started to understand how the neighborhood was being used by people and where all those gaps were, where people were struggling. At the end of last summer, we came up with a report where we outlined 8 projects that the city could do, projects that we had identified by our interactions with the neighborhood as things that would make a difference in people's lives. Put in a bike lane here, put in a crosswalk over there, modest, tiny little things. I went to the city engineer and I said, you really could use a sidewalk here. You know what he said? Why would you say that, John? These are the high return investments. They're everywhere in our communities. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. You just have to see them. And we'll never, ever, ever see them sitting behind a desk. We'll never see them in a formal public hearing. We'll never see them with a survey or with sticker charts on the wall in some type of visioning session. The only way we'll see them is by being in our communities, by actually living there, by being part of it, by enabling those Georges to point them out to us. And the critical thing about this type of investment is not only will it make us rich, not only will it make us wealthy, not only will these little investments, which are within our budget to do now, today, make our places vastly more prosperous. At the same time, they will help people. They will make people's lives better. So let's finish up. The current path that cities are on is not financially stable. We have all embraced this experiment at the same time, at the same scale, continent-wide. We're all in the same position. There is no Detroit, there is no San Bernardino, there's just us, right? We're all on the same path. And it's important that we understand that. The future for most cities is not going to resemble the recent past. There's this notion that if we just get through this economic cycle, right, we'll go back to where we were. We'll go back to where we were. We're not going back. We're not going back to 2005, we're not going back to 1955. The future for this country, the future for this city, is not going to be a trajectory of the last 60 years. It's going to be something fundamentally different. And that brings us to the third point. The main determinant of future prosperity for cities will be the ability of local leaders to transform their communities. The reason I am here, the reason we are doing this boot camp, the reason that Mike, Joe, myself are enthused about this place is because you have three. You have three. You have local leaders transforming their communities. And I'm not talking about your mayor. I love the guy. I really do. I'm not talking about your city council. I'm not talking about your staff. What do you have? You have a city of Georgians. You have a city of people who care and who want this place to be better. You have a room packed full of people here tonight. This is what inspires me. This is what gives me hope that Memphis is going to be a great place to be, not only today, but tomorrow, and over the next generation. Thank you so much.